Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Z. I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in transgender care. Welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to talk to you not only about boundaries, but the type of boundaries that are out there and how to set those boundaries. I wanted to do this video especially today because today, as I'm shooting this, is mid of November. We're just about to enter the holiday season. We're just about to enter, at least here in the United States, we're about to enter Thanksgiving, which is a week from today, and we're about to enter Christmas and New Year. And I know that for a lot of you, holiday season is also known as boundary season, and that is just reality, that is just truth when it comes to family and it comes to loved ones. So I wanted to do this video especially during this time period to help you with boundaries, because I know during this time period for a lot of you boundaries become so essential. So let's dive into it. What are boundaries? What are we talking about when we're talking about boundaries, and how to set healthy boundaries? The way I like to think about boundaries is a way you're going to draw a line between yourself and not only another person, but it's a boundaries that you can set between yourself and other energies, between yourself and other resources, between yourself and anything else that is out there, between yourself and any other environment or anything that comes into that environment. A lot of times we think about boundaries as just something that we set in place with human beings, but that's not true. You can set boundaries essentially with anything. You can set boundary with social media. You can set boundary with, for example, how often you get in the car and drive. You can set all sorts of boundaries. Boundaries are there for primarily for protecting and safeguarding your well-being. Your well-being may be your mental health, it may be your physical well-being, it may be your spiritual well-being, whatever you think it is. In other words, boundary is there to create a space for you to feel like you can breathe, to feel like you can stay grounded in, to feel like you can go ahead and recoup and get yourself re-energized. They're there to really serve and protect you. Sometimes when we think about boundaries, I know that a lot of us jump immediately to the most common boundaries. Boundaries between people, such as setting a physical boundary, sexual boundary, emotional boundary. But what about other boundaries? For example, time boundary. Yes, time boundary. When I sit down and just block 3-hour block in order to create video content, I set a time boundary, not only for myself, but I disconnect my email, I disconnect all of my social media. I make sure my husband knows not to interrupt me, especially if the door is close to this room. He knows definitely not to walk in, because this is my way of saying, this is my boundary. I am setting my time boundary. So there's definitely time boundary in order for you to create a space to be interruption free, especially if you're working on something, and to be drama free. And there's also all sorts of boundaries, not just emotional and physical ones, as I mentioned before, but even for you, especially, there are going to be holiday boundaries. Yes, holiday boundaries, it's the boundaries that you think about only seasonally when it comes to those holidays. You also may have birthday boundaries. You may have boundaries on special events, or you may have specifically for you gender boundaries. That's right, gender boundaries. And gender boundaries, a lot of you already probably set in place without even realizing it. For example, when somebody misgenders you, and I'm sorry that happens, it's like the shittiest things that can happen. When somebody misgenders you, you may assert yourself. You may assert yourself by letting them know what your gender and what your pronouns are. And that's your way of also setting the boundary. If that person then continues to do that for whatever their reasons are, and not really moving even an inch in terms of being mindful, your boundary maybe just end the conversation with them, maybe end your energetic exchange with them. So those are also gender boundaries. There are boundaries that obviously also get into the contact with your physical and your emotional well-being as well. So there's all sorts of boundaries, and a lot of them that we don't even think about. There could be even financial boundary. How much are you going to spend on yourself this week could be set as your own boundary with yourself and your spending practice. So boundaries are very, very essential. And I know that right now, especially for the holiday season, for a lot of you, it becomes even more so. Why? Because a lot of you have families, even as adults. That's right. A lot of you have families who may be telling you things such as, you can't come over for Thanksgiving unless you're presenting the way we want you to present. You can't come over to Thanksgiving until you are going to be using your old name. You can't come over to Thanksgiving until you look particular way. Or you can come over to Thanksgiving and you can be yourself, but you can't talk to my kids. Or you can't, there's all kind of restrictions and parameters people start to establish around the holidays. A lot of times I look at those restrictions as having way more to do with those individuals who are setting them in place and less to do with them, because they're really trying to create whatever feels comfortable for them. And one can easily say, well, is that fair? Isn't that in fact their boundaries, them setting their boundaries of comfort zone? Yeah, absolutely. It is their boundaries in so many different ways, so whatever is comfortable for them. And here's the reality. You don't have to abide by their boundaries, just like your boundaries are your boundaries, and not everybody is going to abide by your boundaries. Ideally, we hope that all human beings are mindful and conscientious enough to respect our spaces. Unfortunately, sometimes not everybody is going to be like that. So what I'm trying to say is that, yes, that is absolutely their boundaries, but you don't have to aspire to it. You also can have your own set of boundaries and your own set of limitations. So for a lot of people, for a lot of trans folks, I see around the holiday season, especially, boundaries tend to come up. And this is when a lot of you are in a position where you have to make those difficult choices of, should I go to a family Christmas together dinner? But if I go, I can be myself. And is that something I'm willing to compromise? And by the way, that is the decision in terms of where to be with your boundary and how to set it is completely up to you. I've seen some people who said that they're okay with not really fully being themselves at this family reunion or family gathering because they're okay with that. And even though it breaks their heart, they make the decision. And I have to respect your decisions because you're adults. And I just hope you set whatever is the best decision for you. And sometimes you may have to set a more firm boundary. You may say that I'm at this point in my life where this is how I'm living, this is how I'm identifying, and this is who I am. And for you to ask me to present at the family holiday only if, it's just not something that's realistic because that if is no longer there. So I can come, and if you would like to compromise, I can come and maybe stay for a shorter duration, but I would love to see you. I would love to be together with the rest of the family. So there's all this room around how and in which way for you to set boundaries. And one of the things you've got to think about when we think about boundaries is that there's all forms of variability when we think about them. For example, they can be very firm, meaning this is my boundary, but at the same time, flexible in a sense that even though this is my boundary that you're setting for yourself, you're flexible enough to have somebody come in and interject some kind of compromising position. Or they can be firm and very inflexible and very set in place. But they can be incredibly rigid this way and no other way. Oftentimes, actually, sadly, the family is one that I see placing very rigid set of boundaries. Or they could be very permeable, kind of much more flexible and much more fluid, and have more way of moving back and forth. So there's all sorts of ways to sort the boundaries for yourself, but you really have to think about what your health and what your well-being is here at place. And you got to think about what really matters to you and what's really important to you, because after all, that's what boundaries are really all about. And if you're going to a family reunion or family Thanksgiving dinner, or you're going to a family Christmas party, or if any other events, because this is also boundaries are not necessarily super holiday specific, right? We got to remember that. So if you're going to any one of those events and as a result of going there, but not affirming your boundary, you feel distress and you feel maybe an increase of dysphoria. Maybe you feel afterwards you come home and all of this hours spent just makes you feel worse versus better. Think about that. Are you actually, in this case, did you actually make a decision that met somebody else's expectations and made them happy, but made you deeply unhappy and brought you actually much more pain and suffering. Because I don't believe that it has to be at expense of one or another. I don't believe that, well, we don't want to have pain, so why don't you go ahead and suffer pain to alleviate our pain, or vice versa. There's always room for compromise. There's just always room for open communications, especially if people are open to them. Sadly, it's just sometimes people are not open to them. But I want you to think about that. When you think about the boundary, first and foremost, ask yourself, why are you setting it? Why is this boundary important to you? Are you just setting a very rigid boundary with your family because you want to drive a point across? Is it worth it? What is going to be the outcome? A lot of times when we do something very rigid and defensive, the outcome is not really the one we want. Are you setting a boundary in this case because for your well-being and for you, that boundary serves you? Then that's great. Are you also being flexible and compromising? Are they being flexible and compromising? When it comes to family, it becomes very difficult. And I know that a lot of people say, well, that's really not fair, that there has to be flexibility when it comes. Why can't they just love me the way I am? Why can't they just love us the way we are? And that's a beautiful, beautiful, very mindful, very heartful perspective. And I wish every family was like that. And the reality is that strangers, I find this amazingly, that strangers and people who are not your family will support and love you, all of us, much more than sometimes family does. And that just breaks my heart. But this is just the reality. And because of that, and also because for a lot of you, I know family matters. We don't exist in a vacuum. Those relationships matter for a lot of you, and only you can decide to what extent they matter. So for that reason, sometimes setting something as rigid as black and white is not going to serve you, and it's not going to serve them. So this is where I say flexibility comes, but it really depends on family and family dynamics. I have seen trans folks who completely cut everybody out because the family environment was so incredibly toxic for them. And that was the best decision they ever made in their whole life, even though they felt lonely. And I have seen people who set very, very firm, but very flexible at the same time and realistic boundaries. I had seen people who set very rigid boundaries. So there's all sorts of ways to set boundaries. There's no one right thing. There's just what feels right to you. But do think about it when you sit down to set down a boundary. Ask yourself why you're doing this. Ask yourself in what way it's going to serve you. Ask yourself whether it serves a bigger picture of your relationships with these individuals in your life. What is the bigger picture? What is the bigger goal? Sometimes a lot of us have to be just the bigger people in lives and be a little bit much more mindful and compromising. And sometimes we don't have to do that. Sometimes we just have to really value ourselves. And there's nothing really to apologize for. So there you go. Let me know, comment below, what boundaries are you going to be setting this holiday seasons? What's going to be really important to you? What you need to do in order to protect your well-being? I know that for me, even though I'm very close with my family, my boundary is to travel for the holidays for no longer than 7 days, because otherwise I just go insane. It becomes too much. My sisters have children and I don't have kids. I'm not a fan of having kids, so you can imagine it drives me nuts. So that's my boundary. Even though my family would love to spend longer than 7 days with me, I just have to kind of say, sorry guys, 7 days is all you're going to get on me, because otherwise I'm just going to be bitchy to everybody, including myself, and it's not worth it. So we all have boundaries that we operate on, and you have to respect your boundary. And respecting your boundary is not only the best for you, but it could end up being the best thing for everybody as well. So comment below, let me know, what boundaries are you going to be setting? Which boundaries matters the most to you? What do you do when your boundaries are not being respected? How do you deal with the holiday season, especially when everybody is shooting and expressing their boundaries? It's almost like a crazy negotiating season when it comes to the holidays. So comment below, let me know. Love reading all of your comments, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.